All right, this is the Becoming Great podcast, where me and my buddy Eric explore topics like life and business. And in the meantime, we are building Great.com, a charity project that will give away 100% of its profits to charity. And I'm here with my good buddy, Eric Bergman, the founder of Great. How are you, Eric?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm here today with Emil Ekwart, my good friend, and you know this annoying guy. If you play sports and he get the ball, and he's in your team, then it's a good thing. And then he's in the other team, and then he scores all the time at you, and that's you. And I'm still haven't forgiven you for when we played floorball and your team won every single game all night. So thank you for being annoying, and thank you for being in my team today.
You're very welcome. And 2 months ago, we did an episode about finance. And the reason that we did that episode is because both me and Eric, we had lost quite a bit of money doing investing. And we realized that we had taken too much risk. So we have now spent the last 2 months researching on how can we make intelligent investment decisions as individuals. And you may notice that we are wearing shirts today, which makes us totally qualified to talk about these subjects. Not really. We are not experts, but we are two very engaged nerds. And what we have tried to find is a strategy that is not too complicated to work for regular people. Something that can be useful if you're not an expert. Because I guess there might be people listening to this that think that investing only should be done by experts and that you can't do it yourself as a regular person. Or there might be people that think that they are experts and that they should make all the decisions. Or you might be someone that feel like, I don't know anything, so I'm just gonna keep my money in the bank. And I suspect that regardless which of these characters you might be, there is going to be value in this episode for you. Because we believe at least, that we have found a strategy that would work really well for all of those people. Do you have anything to add to that rant, Eric?
That was a good rant.
It was a pretty good rant.
I'd just like to say that I can relate to all of those different situations.
Yeah,
I've been in the situation where I feel like, okay, I don't know anything, let someone else deal with all of these things, get the headache out of my way. I've definitely been in a situation that I'm the king of the world, I know everything. And then I made some shitty decisions. And I think that the thing that I can relate to the most is actually the one in between. The overwhelming feeling of I don't know what to do or where to do with this, and I don't really want to engage myself in it, so I'm not doing anything, which personally I believe is the most common scenario, that we don't engage ourselves at all. And that's how I felt when we started doing this. The reason why we did the other episode was a big part of it was that I hadn't been doing anything, so I had put my money in places, but then I kind of got overwhelmed and not interacted with it and not anything else. I got that paralyzing, overwhelming feeling from that. So I think that's the one I can relate to the most myself.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And if you're curious about the emotional aspect and the history of this, there's an episode 10 of the Becoming Great podcast that is called 40 million euro loss or something like that, where we talk about our experiences of losing money and how that affected us. But for now, Eric, investing. Do you have any experience in this area? When did you begin thinking about this?
Okay, so I took my first stumbling steps into investing in shares when I think I was 16 or 17, somewhere around there. And I took some of my savings that I got from my parents, and I put it into this stock portfolio website. And the first share I bought was Ericsson, this Swedish huge company that absolutely can't fail and never can do anything wrong.
Was that because it had the name Eric in it?
Of course. I mean, duh. You're just jealous because no company's called Emil.
I'm gonna start one.
Yes, it was because of Ericsson. No, honestly, I don't know why. It was because it was a big Swedish corporation that's been around since like forever. And the first day, they had the biggest drop that they've had since the internet crash. I think they lost 10% or something. And it completely killed my entire spirit of investing in shares. So I didn't touch that account for probably 7 years or something after that. And well, once again, got into that paralyzed, I don't know what to do here kind of feeling. So that was my first stumbling steps into investments.
And how old did you say you were?
I think I was 16,
Right.
17. It was somewhere around there. How did you get started?
I started reading books on investing when I was... no, actually, I started when I was 10 years old, I think. I got some savings from my grandmother, and then I put that into stocks. So I was like reading the stocks newspaper like every morning, looking how my stocks did. And I started reading books when I was 12.
I just picture this. You got to be the nerdiest 10-year-old ever. I can see you sitting in. You're one of these guys who actually wanted to wear a suit when you were 10, sitting by the dinner table, drinking coffee, even though you're 10 years old, just because you're supposed to do it, and reading the business newspaper. And you had glasses. You definitely had glasses.
I should have had glasses. That would have fit my image.
Yeah, I can
Maybe it was the excitement. There was a part of me that would become a professional poker player later on. That kind of liked the variance bit of it. No, but so I read
clear
books.
Picture in my head how you look. Somehow you have a lot less hair as well when you're in my head.
I had a glorious haircut. I had the one where it's equal long on all sides. And
The
completely
one
blonde.
from Nick in Backstreet Boys. The McDonald's M kind of thing, you know.
No, not
whatever
the McDonald's one, where it's just equally long on all sides, like this. Never mind. We'll talk about haircuts later.
Okay, sidetracked a little bit. So back to investment. 10-year-old Emil reading business magazines.
Yes, I read books from Warren Buffett, the one of the richest people in the world, and his investment strategy was that, all right, it was pretty much like this. Not even experts knows what they're doing. They're not good enough to beat the market, which is just the average results of every company. So people are not good enough to be able to predict the future. Well, a very few number of people are capable of that, and if you're not one of them, you shouldn't even try. So, all right, I shouldn't try. Just put it in an index fund that just mirrors the market. So I pretty much stopped looking after reading about 4 books, and most of them said pretty much the same thing.
Did you read 4 books on investment when you were 10 years old?
12 years old, yeah.
Oh, that's a big
They were thick books, like.
If I finished 4 new magazines of Donald Duck when I was 12 years old,
I read a lot of Donald Duck.
Okay, so basically we're trying to say that we're not experts here, and Emil was a 12-year expert, but then he didn't keep on the track.
I could have become. I had it in me.
It's safe to say you're a nerd, let's put it that way.
Oh yeah. So what have we been up to the last 2 months?
Okay, so 2 months ago we felt we really needed to dig into this and get a better understanding, mainly after me losing 40 million euros on the stock exchange last year, which we talked about in the previous episode, as Emil mentioned. And I started this with an overwhelming feeling like, I don't really want to deal with this. And at the same time, I felt, okay, Eric, you have to wake up. You have to get an understanding about this. There's too much at stake. And we decided to, okay, let's focus on this together for 3 months and learn together and see where can we take this. And the first thing the both of us did was to read a thick book. I think it was like 700 pages or something. Money Master the Game, where Tony Robbins have interviewed Warren Buffett, as you mentioned, and a ton of the other richest people in the world of their advice and how to interact with money, what to do and what not to do. And for me, I felt like, okay, this is a great way to start, and it raised a lot of questions. And the book kind of became the stem of a tree, and it added a lot of questions in the different branches going out. And then Google became my leaves. So I just sat down and read on these things, and I started mind up these questions and prepared that to have you over here. And we did a 10-day get together with the intention of studying finance all the time, but we had too much fun doing other stuff. But either way, what was fascinating about that for me was I came into this thinking that it would be super complex and super complicated, and yet pretty much all the experts that Tony interviewed were agreeing on the same thing, that there was one way of investments that was superior to pretty much everything else. But in that particular way, the banks didn't make any money, so they didn't advertise it. So that became interesting for me. What did you pick up from these things?
Pretty much the same thing, and I think the book did a good job of highlighting the biggest mistake that a regular investor will do. And I think that is kind of the value we can bring in this episode, to talk about common mistakes and make sure that it's not something you do if you're listening and you have money that you want to invest, but you don't know what to do. So I'd say let's dive into some of those mistakes we now know that we should at least be wary of. All right? Okay, so in the beginning I talked about either trusting experts or trying to be your own expert. So let's start with being your own expert. What is the mistake that can be made if you are trying to be an expert and pick the right stocks, trying to hit the right trend, trying to buy something that is hot?
Well, I think the first challenge with being the expert is that it's far more likely that you think you are the expert than that you actually are the expert.
Right.
I mean, this goes back to both me and Emil. We used to be professional poker players, and it was a very common thing there that some people won a lot, even though they might not be super skilled, and thinking they were super skilled just because it was luck. So in poker, roughly 1 person out of 10 wins money and is a good player. And if you ask people, I would say 9 out of 10 would consider themselves good people, good players and experts, and would be beating most of the people. So if you were to look in poker players, I believe that a lot more than 1 in 10 would claim to be an expert and would see themselves as an expert. And I think the same thing goes on with investing. That it's very easy to think of yourself as an expert, or I've definitely thought of myself as an expert, and not being it at all. So I take decisions based on a false sense of knowledge that I don't have.
And I think in poker, I think 1 in 10 people might be winning, but in the end it's a lot less than that. It might be 1% of the players that are big winners, because the 1 in 10 that is winning then end up playing against a bigger fish on a higher level, and then they're not the 1 in 10 anymore. So it's almost like if you look in the ocean, you have tiny fish being eaten by medium fish, being eaten by sharks, being eaten by, and there's a few people at the top of the food chain that eats a lot of fish in the end. And investing seems to be similar, where a lot of the fishes thinks they are winning, but in the end there's a couple of big fishes that eats a lot of the food.
I know we're sidetracking a little bit right now, but I cannot help myself from saying that this is obviously what all the experts were saying in this book. All the world's richest said that you should invest all your money in playing poker.
Yes.
Okay, do not invest all your money in playing poker. I was kidding. Disclaimer.
If you can take a time machine to 2002, you should play poker. Otherwise, do not do it. It's impossible these days. Anywho.
Okay, so to thinking you're the expert, you probably not.
Yeah, and what poker does as a game is that it creates an illusion of competence, because of the luck is so big that even a bad player can have luck in the short term and have really good results, and then they think they're much better than they are. Same thing goes for investing. A really bad investor can make just a random investment, be lucky, and then they think they are the Michael Jordan of investing.
Yeah, that makes sense. This brings me to this analogy you told the other day about gorillas. It's a similar situation.
Yeah, let's save that one for when we talk. I like the metaphor. Don't use it yet.
You like the metaphor? I'll save that one. I like it too.
There will be a gorilla metaphor at some point.
Ooh, cliffhanger. Okay, so what are the other downsides of thinking you're the expert?
I have a really good second gorilla story. Have you seen this video? Okay, I have to tell a sidetrack gorilla story. Have you seen this video where there is... it's a basketball game, and there is hundreds of people in the audience. And then in the middle of the game, a man in a gorilla suit, run across the game. And people don't see the gorilla. Because they don't expect the gorilla.
I think we really need to link this one in the description.
I hope I can find it. I've seen it sometime.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's easy to find it. It's
Yeah.
really cool. You're supposed to look at the ball.
Yeah.
And they're throwing around the ball. And then a gorilla dances through the screen. And no one sees the gorilla because everyone's looking at the ball.
I'm not expecting a gorilla.
Big sidetrack.
Big sidetrack.
All
right.
Any value, but we appreciate your time. It brought that picture into my head and it got me smiling. So I'm projecting more energy into the world.
Yeah. But I mean, if you think you're an expert, given that a few expert makes almost all of the money, what makes, if you're a regular investor just going on gut feeling or read one or two books, what makes you think that you are better than the people who dedicated their entire life to perfecting the skill of investing? Me, for example, I played poker for over 10 years as a professional. I played 5 million hands. I studied 1 hour a day. And still some people that just started playing think, well, maybe I can outsmart him. Well, you can have luck in the short term, but you're not going to outsmart me. You can.
Maybe you didn't have glasses then. You didn't
Maybe.
look as smart.
Yeah. But that's the problem with being an expert, I think. And also it's very difficult.
And I think what we said before, like you think you're an expert, but
Yeah.
you're not. I've definitely thought of myself as someone who knows more than the market. And
Yeah.
I did not.
Yeah. And it's not strange because you have been very successful in other areas of your life. Maybe you're good at sports, you're good at business, then it makes sense that you would be good at investing too. And I see that when I'm out on the tour playing live poker tournaments all the time. I see businessmen out there successful in business, in relationships, and of course they're going to be good at poker as well, right? It's just the being good quality.
Okay,
Life
so
expert.
to sum this up,
Yeah.
it's easy to think that we are experts and we're probably not. So if we're in the first category, seeing ourselves as experts, it might be a good idea to reconsider.
And I think the most crucial time to do that is if you are trying to be an expert and you've been successful, is to not assume that means that you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that? I didn't quite get it.
Okay, cool. So you have tried to be an expert picking stocks, or let's say you tried playing poker and you have been doing really good for a while. That doesn't mean that you beat the game and that you should move out up in stake and quit your day job. Right?
Okay,
It most
so
likely means that you've been lucky.
Okay, so be aware that it was more likely luck than anything else.
Yeah.
And we'll tie this back to the gorillas, another cliffhanger, further into the episode.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So let's look at the other side, the complete opposite of thinking you are the expert doing your own investing. Imagine you think I don't know anything about investing. I'm as far from an expert as I could possibly be. I have to leave this into the hands of professionals. Can you relate to this, and what is the potential mistake here?
Yes, I can definitely relate to this. So the challenge about trusting someone else is that they might not have your best interest at heart. So two situations come to mind for me. And when I started, so I made a lot of money when I took my previous company to the stock exchange. And I wanted to invest millions of euros in something. And I remember the first banker I spoke to gave me advice. Turned out, and I followed those advice. I bought this and that share that they recommended, and they were horrible. It's been the worst investments I've done. And when I read on it later on, I realized, okay, these are not the best companies, but there are companies that bank had helped take to the stock exchange. So it was in that bank's best interest that these shares were doing well, not necessarily me as a client's best interest. So they gave me advice where they were clearly biased, saying that these shares are good because they want the company to do good because they have recommended it before, and they helped them with a lot of services. So it was clients of the bank rather than me. So I ended up losing hundreds of thousands of euros because I followed the first advice that I got there. And I realized afterwards, like, I felt the deep mistrust, and I felt stupid because I hadn't done the research on this on my own. So I thought that they would have my best interest because I was a client, and it turned out they did not. And then I didn't follow any banker's advice for a while. I did my own thing. I considered myself an expert, but I still met with banks regularly. And when you have a lot of money, the banks want to be your best friend. So they flew me to Barcelona to watch Formula One with a lot of superstars and stuff like that. So I got to do these cool things, but I also then got tied back into talking to these bankers and getting advice. And one thing they kept telling me was, okay, Eric, you are having too high risk. You should lower your risk, which was solid advice. And me, considering myself to be an expert, didn't want to listen. And after a while and a bunch of meetings, when they realized that they could not get me to lower the risk and following their advice, they instead flipped everything around and tried to get me to double my risk because they wanted to sell me products they could make money from. So they lost all their credibility for me when their first advice had been always lower your risk, lower your risk, lower your risk. And then suddenly they started telling me double my risk, double my risk. And my feeling with that, and I'm not sure if that's true, but my feeling was that, okay, they just want to make money from me. The first advice was, it wasn't advice, it was they wanted to sell me something that lowered my risk. And when they realized that they couldn't sell me something that lowered my risk, they flipped it around and tried to sell me something that doubled my risk. So this has then been the challenge with trusting experts, that they work on commission a lot of the time. They have titles like advisor or anything else, but in my experience, they're salespeople going for bonuses, and their best interest is not the same as your best interest a lot of the time, because what brings them the most money is likely what brings you the least money because they need to take the money somewhere. Yeah, was this easy to follow?
Yeah, that made a lot of sense. That experts, not always, I guess, but I think a lot of the time their job is to make money for the bank and not for you. And to do that, they offer investment opportunities that are good for the banks. And I guess they also charge you fees, right? And how are those fees affecting?
Yeah, so this is another thing that I've been really focused on the last 2 months, understanding bank fees and where is the money going and how much is being charged everywhere, because it's a mess. And I've realized that I pay tons and tons of, not hidden fees, but fees you need to kind of read the terms and conditions to see. And it adds up a lot. So I pay some money just to have my bank account on a yearly basis. I pay some money every time I buy something and sell something and does something. I pay for some advice. I pay for some tax planning thing I don't use. I pay for all of these different things that's involved with it. And it's not like you go to the store, you buy a can of Coke and you know it's €1. It's like, yeah, it's 0.23% here, 0.1% here, 2% here, and it's a lot of teeny tiny things that all together look like nothing. But when you squeeze all those fees together and start looking at it, I realize that that's taking out a big portion of my investment without me even being aware of it.
But if it's like 0.25% here, 2% here, it doesn't sound like it's that much. But I guess I know that you have calculated how much that actually adds up to.
Yes. Well, it's quite complex to get to a specific number, but that's the core of it is it doesn't sound like much, but it is a lot. So if you think of it, let's say you have €1,000 in the bank and you have 5% return on investment. Basically, you make 5% extra every year on being on the stock exchange, for example. And if we just take the smallest and simplest example of this, you end up paying 1% in fees. Then it sounds like you're just paying 1%, but you're paying 1% out of the 5% you made in profit, which means that you're actually paying 20% of everything that you're getting in fees. So for not really anything you can see and anything you understand, 20% of what you made is gone to the bank for whatever they did. And this can easily be lowered a lot by just being aware of these costs and knowing what bank to use or what investment method to use.
And to be clear, that is 20% in 1 year, but then investment stacks. Could you explain how compounded interest works?
Not in a good way, but I can give it a try.
Yeah.
So if you think of a snowball and it's on the top of the hill, at first it's very, very small, and then you just roll it down and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger from time, not adding any force, not adding anything. So this is the idea of investing. If you start with €1,000 and then over time it will just increase with interest, and the interest will compound over time. So at first, let's say you have 10% of return on investments every year, or then you start with €1,000. The second year is €1,100, and then you get 10% of that, which takes you to €1,210. And in only 7 years, you will have doubled your money. So in 7 years, you're up to €2,000. In 14 years, you're up to €4,000. So you double every 7 years if you have 10% profit. But the same thing happens with the fees then, that the fees will increase all the time because of the amount of money will increase, and it will take a big part of it. So it's basically like, if you see that snowball rolling down, if it would stay solid, it would just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because everything kind of adds more snow to it. But if there would be a stick in there, it wouldn't be able to roll as well, or it wouldn't be able to collect the snow everywhere. So it would be a lot smaller, even though it's a small stick. Not sure if that analogy really flies, but that's
the snowball effect made a lot of sense. And the idea is that even though it's 20% in the beginning, it will become more than 20% over time because the snowball can't roll that well. And
I think this is a good thing that you are listening to this and it's interesting. I think it's Google for compound interest and examples. They will be able to explain it a lot better with numbers and with some pictures than I can do here. Yeah,
it's easier when you see it. And you took an example of 1% fees, but some funds have much more fees than that. And if you are up to 2%, 3%, then you can really limit how big your snowball can become.
Yeah, and especially over time. Yeah. And the main thing that's important to take from this is it looks like small fees, but at the end of the day, they're huge. Yeah. So if that's the only thing that someone takes from this, then that's a win. Just that understanding. Think if you can see the snowball and knowing that, it will be half the size if there are fees. That means that basically the snow has been melting.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to be a big snowball.
Yeah.
So just being aware of that has been a big thing for me.
All right. So someone might be listening and say, okay, of course I don't want to pay fees, right? But I don't know how to invest myself. So I kind of have to pay some fees to let an expert do it. That kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's easy to think of it that way, and that's what's been the main gist of what we've been studying now. That I've been going into this with the intention of, okay, I need to understand this, probably I need an expert to tell me. And what I briefly touched upon before is this one way of investing that might solve this riddle, that it might be easy, and that all these experts recommended in the book, or almost all of them. And that's called index funds. And what's cool with an index fund is that you're buying a little part of lots of different companies, but there's not one expert choosing them. They're actually choosing all of them. So the main one is an American one called S&P 500, which is the 500 biggest companies in the US. And instead of someone then picking the 5 best ones or the 10 best ones and charging a lot for doing so, you're basically investing a little bit in all of those, and no one makes a decision, which means that it's a lot cheaper. There's almost no fees at all, and you're still investing in all the companies. So if some of them goes badly and some of them goes good, you'll get whatever it takes out. And what's interesting with this is that, well, the 500 biggest companies in the US are likely over time the 500 companies that have been the best at making money. That's how they became the 500 biggest ones. They're the 500 ones that were best at growth, best at innovation, best at these things. At least they've been over the past decades. So by just investing in those, you're following the average. And the average is really good, or has at least historically been really good. And because there is no fees, barely no fees, you're not paying any experts, and even if some expert might be slightly better than this, you're coming out on top because no one is charging you that 20% of your profit.
Okay, so instead of buying just a couple of stocks or just investing in one thing, you're investing in everything. You're investing in all of the big companies in the entire world almost. So would you explain why it's important to diversify?
Yeah, so basically what you're doing here is spreading your risks. So we're talking about our savings and the money that we care for. And if you have them in one company and maybe that company goes bankrupt for whatever reason, they lose their biggest client, they do whatever it is, something happened, then you're screwed. But if you're in 1,000 companies and one goes bankrupt, some other one wins the lottery, and it doesn't really matter. So if you're in one company, you can make a lot more money quicker, but you can also lose a lot more money quicker. And if you're investing in, let's say, the S&P 500, you're investing in the 500 biggest companies, you're basically investing in capitalism. You're investing in that you think the world will progress, that you think we will come up with new innovations, that everything will be better tomorrow than it was yesterday. And that's kind of the only idea you need to believe in. You need to believe in companies as an idea, because all companies have as their, well, pretty much all companies have as their main task to grow and make more money. So it's enough that you're investing in that idea rather than one company in itself.
Yeah.
Did that explain diversification, or did I go?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially like that you're investing in. You're investing in the future. What did you say? You put it really well. Should you repeat that?
Yeah, I stole this. So this is something that I'm not sure if Warren Buffett or Jack Bogle or some of these brilliant geniuses said this, so I can't take credit for it, but I'm going to. So this was all my idea. And basically you're investing in capitalism. You're investing in the idea of companies. So if you're buying all the companies, then you will go as well as the companies are going. So if you believe that tomorrow will be better than today, that technology will improve, that all of these things will happen, and that we will be more efficient and smarter tomorrow than we were yesterday, then it's a good idea to invest in companies. And if you're investing in an index fund, you can cheaply invest in tons of companies without doing the effort.
All right. And how much money can you make in an index fund?
I mean, that depends on how much money you put into it. It's tricky to say. If you're looking at the S&P 500, this index fund of the US, it's been going up with roughly 10% per year, which is a lot. And there's no way of saying that's going to happen in the future. But in the past 10 years, it's been.
In 10 years?
And yeah, so per year in 10 years, which means that if you put your money in 10 years ago, there would be more than double today. And it's been going very well for a long time, but there's no, you can't know for sure that nothing's going to happen. We can have another financial crisis tomorrow, or maybe artificial intelligence takes over the world and blows up all of the American companies. I don't know. It could happen. Unlikely. But it's one way of investing that is surprisingly simple, is surprisingly cheap, spreads the risks very well. And I think what's been most interesting for me in this, because I know genius Emil, 10, 12 years old, read about index funds. Genius Eric did not when he was 12. And not when he was, say, 17, 19, or for that matter, 28. But what's been interesting with this for me is the part about the banks barely make any money from it. And that also means that if we say that the banks are salespeople, which is my experience, then why would they sell you something that they barely make any money from? They want to sell you something with a high fee. They don't want to sell something that costs 0.04%. They want to sell something that costs 2%. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. But then you said that the index fund makes 10% profit a year on average. But then the bank might say, okay, we have a fund that is making 20% per year. And sure, we have a 2% fee, but that would still add up to 18%, right?
Yeah, if that was true. And it very rarely is. So once again, okay, now we're going into complicated land, and I'm going to try to explain this in a way that my best understanding can. And it's going to be interesting to see if it makes sense. So one of the things that I took from the book, which was very interesting, was how these funds work. So there are index funds, as we touched upon, and there are mutual funds, which are, and hedge funds. They're different kinds of funds. Let's call them hedge funds. And these are funds where someone sits and selects the best different shares, and then they look very closely which companies are the best, and they try to outperform the index. They want to beat the index.
Beat the market.
Beat the market. And for this, they charge a lot of fees. And what they do is, if you think of a bank starting 10 different funds today, then just based on sheer luck, they will choose 20 shares in each fund, for example. Based on sheer luck, some of them will get better than index, and some of them will be worse than index. And what's common to do then is that they take the ones out of their portfolio that got worse. So they stop selling those because no one wants to buy the funds that were worse than index. And they keep selling the ones that were better than index, and then they start new ones. So it looks like the funds have been beating index because they're really, really good, but it's much more likely that they've been beating index because they've been really lucky. And yeah, this is where your
gorilla time
comes into picture. I think you're pegging up for this. Yeah, give me the gorillas.
You do the gorilla. I did the last gorilla. You do the gorilla.
Okay, so gorilla time. Let's paint a picture for you. Imagine that you're walking in the old gym of your school when you're 12 years old.
Reading a Warren Buffett book.
All around, there are gorillas. There are 1,024 gorillas. Think of the smell. 1020. Think about the noise. And then you see that all of them are standing opposite each other, one on one, and they're all holding a coin. And then they start flipping. And everyone should get heads. If they get tails, they're out. So 1024 flips. Can you hear that sound? 1024 coins spinning around at the same time. And they land. And out of this, it's very likely that 512 will get heads. So 512 of the gorillas will be out. And then they do it again. And we'll be down to 256. And then they do it again and again and again and again and again. And after 10 times, there will be one gorilla left, mathematically, who have done 10 flips in a row and gotten 10 heads. Now, you could argue that this gorilla is very skilled at flipping coins. Or it could possibly be that he's very lucky. Or she. Let's say it's she. This could be a female skilled gorilla. And this is basically what happens with the hedge funds now.
But the gorilla put on a suit, right?
Yeah, the gorilla had a suit, obviously. The luckiest one. And he charged high fees for flipping coins. Yeah, so this is basically what happens in the fund market. So you can imagine that you start with 1,000 and, just say 1,000 funds to make it easy. And after 1 year, half of them would not be as profitable, so they take them out and there's only 500 left. And they might start 500 new ones. And after 10 years, they will have one fund that's been immensely lucky, that made a lot of money, that's been so much better than anyone else. And because it's investment, people will say they're experts and they've done really good things. But if they were a gorilla, no one would argue that, or at least very few. Maybe someone would say it was a very good coin flipping gorilla. So it's easy to look. The bank can say, hey, but look at this gorilla. He has flipped heads 10 times in a row. Of course, the 11th time is going to be heads as well, and the 12th. And so because of that, we're going to charge you more for betting on the gorilla. And it's the same thing with the funds. I'm hoping this made sense and people not just stuck with the idea of 1,000 gorillas in the
That
gym.
made a lot of sense. That made a lot of sense. And I mean, it makes sense, right? You can market a really good gorilla. And at the same time, have you seen any ads for, do you smell that? It's oxygen.
Gorilla?
Did you see the ad for
oxygen.
oxygen lately on the news?
Yeah, I've been buying a lot.
Yeah, I love those ads. But no one is making ads for oxygen because no one can make money out of air, right? But
No.
and that is the air then would be the index fund. It's very tricky for banks to make money of it, so no one would market it. And I think
It might be the best and most important thing. So air is obviously the best thing for us as humans. Without that, we would not survive many minutes. And we can definitely survive without index funds. So it goes a little bit over the top. But I like how you put it, like no company makes money from it, so no one advertises it. And no one really tells us how important it is. And it's the same thing here. So that's why I've been investing or considering myself an expert in many ways, and I didn't even know of this or how it works.
it's funny how these 3 months have progressed. I kind of feel like Frodo from Lord of the Rings. And, I'm heading out with Gandalf on this big adventure, leaving Shire, do all this cool stuff, throw the ring in the fire. And then I come back to Shire, and everything is the same, but I am different. And I kind of feel like that in this financial journey, that I started off 12 years old, Warren Buffett saying, don't pay a lot of fees, the experts don't know what they're doing, buy an index fund. And now I'm here later, having studied, done the work, buy an index fund. But at the same time, so it's the same, it's still Shire, but I am different in Shire. I have a higher understanding.
I love the analogy. Okay, so basically what we're saying is index funds are the secret sauce to investing. At least that's what we consider with our nerdiness and not expertness. Should we then put all our money in index funds, or what's the downsides of index funds?
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're putting all of your money in one thing, but at the same time you're putting all of your money in all things. So you have a lot of diversity. then like if you want to be really nerd about it, you can have kind of different index funds. You can have index funds in different markets. But what do you say?
So I think it's important to know that when you put all your money in index funds, you're putting all your money in shares in reality. So a fund is just a lot of different shares. And the stock market can still fluctuate a lot. So I think on the financial crisis, I think the stock market crashed about 35%. So it's still, if you put all your savings into index funds, it's not unlikely, well, it's not very unlikely that you will lose 50% of it if it's a really crappy time.
And it's likely that you will lose 50% at some point if you have them for 20 years.
At some point, very likely, very likely. So this is then an important thing to keep in mind. So I wouldn't suggest anyone to put all their money into this unless they have a very long time horizon, and especially not putting all the money if they needed to buy an apartment a year from now, because you can actually lose a lot of money in a short time. So even if you're investing in 500 biggest company in the US, they're not going to go bankrupt in a year. That's definitely not going to happen. But the stock market can plummet, and the financial crisis can happen, and there can be a depression or whatever. There could be a war, and then it might happen. So depending on your risk tolerance and your time span, there might be the right idea to put 10% of your money into index funds, or 90% of your money into index fund, depending on how dependent you are.
So if you want to take lower risk, where should you put the rest of your money?
The lowest risk is to just have your money in a bank account. You're not going to have any interest really. You're not going to make barely any money from it at all. But you know that if you put 1,000 euros in the bank account, and given that it's not a really crappy bank, you will have 1,000 euros there in a year from now as well. And then there are all kinds of other tools where you can get some interest. There are bonds and a lot of different value papers that I don't know much about, and definitely not good enough to explain it very well. But it's good to be aware of that. There is a significant risk in index funds, even though if it's a lot less than buying a couple of single shares.
So some bonds give you a low interest, but it's much lower risk.
Yeah. So
what is the risk then with having money in the bank? Because what you say, you have 1,000 euro now, but how does that look like in the future?
Yeah, well, so the main risk is inflation. Basically, money becoming worth less a year from now. The reason why you 50 years ago could get a lot of stuff for a penny, and now you can't use it for anything. So that's inflation. And that happens all the time, and roughly about 2% per year. So if you have 1,000 euros and you put them in a bank account now with no interest, in reality, you will still have 1,000 euros a year from now, but those 1,000 euros will only be worth, 98% of what it used to be. So you're down to 980 euros. So you're down to that. So that's what's happening. That's the biggest risk, I would say. Not looking at bank might go bankrupt, which happens. But that's going to happen for sure. So you're always taking a risk in a sense by not being in the market as well. It's easy to think that it's safe to not do something, but it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, that's well worth putting in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, so I think it's time to start wrapping this up. So what are your biggest insights during these 2 months?
Well, there's one thing we didn't touch upon. We kind of touched upon it. So we mentioned in the beginning that you could either think you're the expert and maybe you're not. You can think you're definitely not the expert and then be forced to trust experts, which might not be the best case because they might be expensive and biased. And there is the third category, which is you might think that this is overwhelming and you're not doing anything, which either then could lead you having the money in the bank account but not doing anything else. And this is the one I resonate the most with myself. I felt overwhelmed and haven't done anything. And one way around that would be to just buy index funds, but I haven't done that in the past. And I can see that's been holding me back, and I can then see the problem with this. Like, the thought of how overwhelming it is makes me not want to do it. And just going into this for a couple of months, reading a lot, discussing it with you, discussing it with other people that I know and trust, and feeling that index funds sounds too good to be true. It sounds too easy. And still it seemed to actually be that good of an option. Sure, it's not nirvana. It's not going to solve all your problems, but it's very likely that it's a good option to do and well worth either looking at some YouTube video just explaining this or trying to get whatever we try to explain here, even if we're far from experts or rhetorical genius in these kind of aspects. But just being aware of standing still might be the worst option for you. It might be better. It might be even better to trust the experts than to not do anything and be paralyzed. So that's one thing I just wanted to highlight. But yeah, let's wrap it up. What did you take with you from these weeks of studying, or months?
I think the biggest thing that I haven't thought about this before, but one thing I gotten out of it is a definition of what it means to be financially independent that works for me, right? So before, when I was 12, I learned about index funds, but when I thought of someone that is financially independent, I would think that's at least 10 million euros. At least. If I have at least that would not, maybe not even then, I would be financially independent, because I couldn't do whatever I want. I couldn't like have 2 airplanes and whatever. But
10-year-old me only wanted 2 airplanes. Humble guy.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, financially independent would be being able to do whatever, right?
Yeah.
And Tony Robbins defined financially independent as having a passive income, which means the interest from your investments, that is higher than your expenses. So one way to do that is to have a lot of money, or you can lower your expenses and being able to have all of your needs covered with a lot less money, right? So
basically owning your own time.
Yeah.
So if you have interests that covers your costs of living, like your rent and your food and whatever you do on a regular basis, then you don't need to work. You don't have to.
You don't need to work. You probably are going to want to, because you probably want to do something that feels meaningful, where you can contribute and grow and learn. And at the same time, you don't want to. So that would come from pure lust and passion, right? And what I realized is that the money needed to do that is actually a lot less than what I thought. So imagine you have 5% return of investment on your money. That means that if you have, this math might be a little bit complicated, so you will, if you could clarify this afterwards. If you have 20 times what you spend in a year with 5% interest, then you are financially independent.
Okay, so let's take that into an example. Let's say we have costs of 2,000 euros a month, rent and food. Then, and we need 2,000. That's 24,000 euros a year that we need. So we would need 20 times more than that, which is roughly then 500,000 euros, to be able to do whatever we want and not have to work. So with 500,000 euros in the bank and 5% interest or return on investment from the stock exchange would be enough not having to work. If you just have 2,000 euros a month in expenses, which is okay. Yeah.
And that is kind of cool, because that is 500,000 euros to be financially independent. And I would have never guessed when I wish I would have done this math in school, actually. Because for my whole youth, I thought, all right, to feel really secure financially, I need 10 millions. But I think the biggest thing I realized is that number is a lot smaller than I thought. And that makes it seems a lot more doable. I think it's much easier to reach there. I don't have to take super high risks, and it seems much more doable. And
And you can take it down to 100,000 euros then as well, for example. And if you have 5% or return on investment of that, that's 5,000 euros a month, which is roughly 400 euros extra, 5,000 euros a year, which is roughly 400 euros extra a month, which would make a big impact in anyone's wallet. And it would also help saving if you want to do that. So once again, if you have those 100,000, let's say, which is still a lot of money, but that means the snowball has started rolling. So you would get 400 euros extra a month that would just go into your savings from just having that.
And imagine you had those 500,000 that would cover your expenses of 2,000 euros. But then imagine that instead of spending that money, you kept working because you wanted to, and you could cover your expenses. Then that money instead would just keep compiling, and that snowball would just roll. And after a couple of years, that money is doubled. Now your passive income is twice as much.
Yeah, and the passive income keeps increasing as well.
So that's the biggest thing I've learned. What is the biggest thing you learned?
Well, this simply that I went into this feeling overwhelmed, feeling that this will be so complex. I'm gonna need to put so many hours into this. And wherever I looked, whatever expert I saw or whoever I spoke to, it's like, hey, index funds.
Yeah.
And it seemed so much simpler than I.
And that is every expert that don't have an interest in selling you something. Seems to be very
valuable point. So every expert that can't make money from me or is not in this to make money from me has been recommended this, and it makes it so easy. And I haven't found any big downsides with it other than you're still betting on the stock market, so there's a risk.
I think a really cool benefit of index funds as well is that you're never going to buy or sell something. So if you have stocks, you are always like, is this a good time to actually own that tech stock or that Ericsson or that whatever. But here you could literally just buy your index fund and never look at it again. You could buy it and not look for it for 10 years, because regardless what the market is doing, you're just gonna keep owning that index.
Yeah, and it's gonna save you from a lot of nightmares and bad sleep and bad decisions, because it's very easy that you sell because the market crashes, or you buy because it's been going up for a long time, and that means that you're selling when it's actually the low price and buying when it's a high price.
And
that's another.
And I mean, if you're gonna owe something, if let's say I'm buying an index fund and I know this is money that I put aside for me being older, right? I might not touch it for 30 years. Then I know that during that time there will be a couple of drops as big as 50% probably. And I know that beforehand, so when it happens, I don't have to lie sleepless at night worrying about it. I'm prepared for it.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that was pretty much it.
Pretty much. I'm happy to learn together with you.
And as always, if you have any comments, ideas, suggestions for improvement, did you like this? Did you hate it? Would you like some more shitty financial advice from two happy nerds wearing shirts, looking like they know what they're doing? Send us an email to podcast@great.com.
Thanks for today.
Have the best day of your life.
I will.
Bye.
Bye.